Welcome to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. The Vancouver Writers Fest connects people to exceptional books, ideas, and dialogue through year-round programming that ignites a passion for words and the world around us. We carry out our work on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'm Joyce Wan, Marketing and Digital Production Coordinator, and this month on the podcast, we're very pleased to share this conversation between writer, director, and actor Sarah Polley and Writers Fest Artistic Director Leslie Hurtig. This event, presented in partnership with the Vancouver International Film Festival, was recorded live on June 28, 2022. Sarah Polley is the author of the #1 nationally best-selling memoir, Run Towards the Danger, which comes out as a paperback later this month from Penguin Canada. She is also the director of Woman Talking, adapted from the novel by Miriam Toews, which is nominated for the Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay Awards at the 2023 Oscars.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. How nice to see you all. My name is Leslie Hurtig, and I'm the Artistic Director at the Vancouver Writers Fest, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our first in-person special event in 27 months. It's our great honor this evening to be welcoming writer, director, and author Sarah Polley to Vancouver to discuss her book, Run Towards the Danger: Confrontations with a Body of Memory. I would like to acknowledge that the Vancouver Writers Fest carries out its work and this event here this evening on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We are very cognizant of the history of these lands and the urgent and necessary work that's still to come as we move toward reconciliation and Indigenous sovereignty. This event tonight is presented in partnership with VIF. Great thanks to them for their promotional support. In these strange and deeply challenging times, we are more thankful than ever to our public sector funders: the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the BC Government, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island. And thank you also to Penguin Random House Canada for making Sarah's visit here tonight possible. The format for tonight is pretty straightforward. Sarah and I will talk for a while, and then we're going to turn it over to you, our audience, to ask some questions. Sarah will then be signing copies of her book, courtesy of our festival bookseller Book Warehouse. That is going to be happening on the main floor where you entered this building. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our guest. You may have first known her as a young actor, starring in The Road to Avonlea or perhaps The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. But from a very young age, her creative nature and wise beyond years mindset brought her to directing, film adaptations, and screenwriting that garnered her multiple Genie Awards, 2 Oscar nominations, and a New York Film Critics Circle Award, all by the age of 27. In 2012, Stories We Tell, a documentary written and directed by Polley, was named one of the top 10 Canadian films of all time. Much like her debut book, it revealed a notion that the way in which each of us retains and tells a story is inherently different, and the truth of any story lies with the one who lived through it. To tell us more about this remarkable debut, please welcome Sarah Polley.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming after we had to reschedule. I got COVID, and I'm better now, but I'm so happy that there's this many people here for the rescheduled event. Thanks for not giving up.
There is so much that I would like to dive into here, but I would like to start by saying what a pleasure it was to read these essays and how beautifully threaded and connected they all are, and how much I loved the framing of literature throughout all of these stories. Was that an intentional thing?
I think I knew that there would be a thread of other stories and of storytelling, because I think that's something that I tend to fixate on generally. And I think the whole concept of having narratives for these sort of important formative stories in our lives, and what it means to have a narrative, what it means to have your own narrative as opposed to the ones that have been handed down to you, and what it means to question those narratives and recognize there are other narratives, I think naturally lent itself to like echoing with pieces of literature like Alice in Wonderland or Alice Through the Looking Glass, or, the work of the authors that were really formative for me.
Mm-hmm. We were talking backstage about an early part in the book here where you talked about how growing up, even as a young child, your family would share stories with one another, even if they weren't what, many of us would consider age appropriate, for instance. Can you tell us a bit about what that was like and what was the home like with books?
Sure. My sister Susie's sitting in the front row, so I'll try to be as honest as possible with that in mind. I will say she was not a culprit. She's the only one who wasn't a culprit. You're off the hook. Now I'm going to say whatever I want. I'm going to just trash everybody. But I think, I think that the thing that I love the most about the family that I grew up in, and that was also the most challenging, was there were no sacred cows. There were no boundaries on what you could say or what you could make fun of, a joke you could make, a topic you could bring up. Like nothing was too painful or too taboo to just sort of whip at somebody. That was like, the culture of it, which is liberating in a way. I mean, like I meet people who grew up in families who repressed all of the difficult topics, mm-hmm. and I can't even imagine the relief of that. It must be so nice. But at the same time, it's kind of also a very liberating thing to know there's nothing that can't be dealt with, usually through caustic humor. But then, that became a recurring theme. Like I would go into these work environments where, oftentimes there would be no sort of boundaries between what people would say to an adult and what, people would say to a child. And I maybe didn't have like the best antenna for sort of realizing what was appropriate and what wasn't, because I came from a family where everything was fair game.
Right. You talked about...
Except for Susie. Susie was awesome.
I see a theme here tonight. You talk a bit in the book about going to Stratford to perform as the lead in Alice in Wonderland. And from the very early on, the director said to all of you, to the whole cast, this is a play for children. We are putting on a play for children. Why was that difficult for you as a child at the time?
Well, I mean, I'd been raised with the Alice Liddell, Charles Dodgson story as this very complex story. I mean, there's a lot of speculation that, Charles Liddell had pedophilic instincts and, I maybe didn't act on them, but was in love with Alice Liddell. And that was, always taught to me as sort of a thread through that story. And I'd grown up with the movie Dream Child, which talks about that relationship and unpacks it somewhat, although I think stays away from maybe the more potentially nefarious elements of it. So then I went to Stratford and, thought I was playing the Alice that I had grown up with, which is a very complicated Alice, actually. And suddenly it was a play to delight children, which is, of course, what it should be if you're mounting it as a children's play in Stratford. And I actually just want to point out that someone who's really important as one of the heroes in that essay, Alice Collapsing, was Michelle Fisk, who played the Red Queen, who's actually here tonight. Who we just saw each other for the first time in decades today. Yeah. So.
A very difficult time for you that was, and it really set the tone for the rest of the essays in this book. It was perhaps the first time when you had a glimpse of your body not doing what you needed it to do. The curvature of the spine that had been previously undiagnosed. Did you have a sense at the time that it was going to be a difficult path for you, or did you truly just want to just motor ahead and forget about it because you're a teenager and you're doing your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with scoliosis is, oftentimes it can be really well managed and corrected, at least somewhat, or at least the progress can be stopped by a brace. And so I had this brace. Problem with a brace with a 12 and 13-year-old girl is it requires enforcement to make someone wear for 16 hours a day, a hard plastic brace that kind of binds you and is terribly uncomfortable. And I didn't have much adult supervision. So at some point I was like, brace, what brace? And then of course, things, got pretty out of control, and the curve of my spine at one point, I think, was 60 degrees. And I was acting in Alice at the time. And then, and I talk about this a lot in the book, I had this debilitating stage fright that developed. Don't worry, I'm good now. Don't panic. But I had this kind of intense stage fright that developed, and I couldn't figure out how to get out of the play, which is kind of crazy. I was thinking with a 15-year-old brain. I was surrounded by very nurturing adults actually in that play who would have helped me either manage the stage fright or would have been fine with me dropping out. Both the director and the cast. It was an unusually kind group of people, but in my brain, the shame of having this fear, and I think that's, when you layer shame on top of anything, the thing grows exponentially. So I was very, very ashamed of having this fear. And I thought the only way in my mind I could get out of the play was by going to the, appointment that I had avoided for years with this orthopedic surgeon, and hopefully getting the surgery. And sure enough, I went to them and he was like, yeah, no, you need surgery, but not right away. We can wait till your play run is over. And I was like, actually, as it turns out. And so I managed to get out because of emergency surgery. And then, years and years went by before I could see that through an adult's eyes. I was still very much locked in the 15-year-old perspective of, I told this terrible lie. It was so shameful that I felt this fear. I've lied to all these people. I fell out of touch with people like Michelle for decades over. You carry these feelings from childhood with you as though they're your present self. It's very hard to get to your adult self to unpack the meaning of those things or have perspective on them.
Yeah. And that certainly plays into another theme through the book, which is your memory and how your memory shifts on you and tells you what perhaps the reality was too late in the game. I'm curious to know what you think, is it possible that your experience on Road to Avonlea, where you weren't really being paid attention to, your needs weren't really being paid attention to there. You were made to work through your mother's death, for instance, and made to perform a scene where you were acting out the death of your mother. That doesn't feel like care to me. And I wonder if perhaps, do you feel maybe you didn't learn to trust the adults you were working for because it wasn't really happening for you at a young age?
I guess so, although I think it was really clear who the villains were in that situation. So I'm not sure it did extend to all adults, because for me, the people who really saved the day were always crew people they were always the people with the least power and who had the most to lose. And those were the people who would always step in front of a terrible situation when they could, at the risk of losing their jobs. And in my memory, I think at least one person did. So for me, it was all, it really politicized me too, right? Because it was always the people with the most power, the most money, probably the least experience, who were responsible for the things that happened to me. And it was generally the people on the ground who were actually doing the work, who actually knew the job, who were, the shoulder to cry on, or the ally, or the person who would step in. So I don't think it left me with a general distrust of adults, but it certainly left me with a profound distrust of people in positions of power.
Yeah. You, in the essay, Alice Collapsing, you begin and thread throughout quotes from Alice in Wonderland, and you articulate your discomfort as a child with that story because she was always asking for help, but never getting straightforward answers. That just seems to be such a mirror for what you're describing right now. And the Alice quotes that you used in this book, for those of you who haven't read them yet, amazing. You have to see how she's woven them together. Did you have an aha moment writing this book where you suddenly went, oh my God, this is me. This is about me.
Yeah, I kind of couldn't believe it. And I knew I had to reread the Alice stories to write the essay. I had to reread the play because it had sort of faded for me. And then I was like, I should reread them. books. And I'd always hated those books so much as a kid. They always left me feeling so unsettled. They're unsettling books. I mean, the undertones of them and even the overtones are really disturbing. Mm-hmm. So I forced myself to read them, and I was just stunned because there were so many lines that Alice says that, spoke so directly to my feelings and my experience at that age, at 15, being in that play, and at various times in my childhood, and that feeling of being 3 different sizes in one day. Being expected to be a child and an adult and somewhere in between. And, they're just, and the rage she has at people making things overly complex and overly difficult, that should have simple answers, and people justifying bad behavior, with riddles, it was amazing to me, the resonance of that book with my own experience so it began to weave itself into the essay.
Mm-hmm. This is when I was absolutely drawn into this book, realizing, wow, that's quite something. And you went on to say that you began having difficulty separating the story that you were performing over and over again on stage, with the building fear of being on stage, separating that from real life and what your real life was. So you came to a realization at that point about your own health. How did that play out? How did you tackle that?
I mean, I think that the terror of going on stage that was building and becoming more and more monstrous for me, and that I was keeping so secret. I mean, I was hiding it very well. I would be in the basement of the theater in the rehearsal space sobbing. I would come up and make a few jokes and go on stage. And I think there was just a moment where sustaining that amount of terror for that long in secret without seeking support, you lose your grasp on reality. At some point, you're in nervous breakdown territory. And that's certainly where I went to. And then the play itself for me, the divisions between reality and the play would come in and out. Mm-hmm.
There are stories throughout here that, talk about misogyny. The intense feelings of the White Knight, for instance, which you already referred to, and Alice, the relationship of Alice Liddell and Charles Dodgson, and your own feelings of pity toward that old White Knight, and how it reflected your own feelings about your dear dad, who was doing the best he could, but had a different sense of perhaps reality in his own way. Was that something that you were able to confront with him at that time, or did that just go unsaid?
I think that would all have been pretty unsaid, I would say. I think, I didn't have a lot of anger towards my dad. I think I was very aware of what his limitations were as, an older English man who had women do everything for him for his entire life, right? And a really lovely guy, kind of benevolent and brilliant and interesting and curious. And I don't think he had a mean bone in his body, but he wasn't functional when my mom died because there was nobody to take care of him. And therefore he did not have the tools to take care of me. So I don't think he was never a villain for me in my mind. He was always, what Alice feels about the White Knight, which is, sort of watching him walk away, and he's put a hole in the bottom of his, pack so that the rain won't get in, but everything is falling out, and, saying goodbye and hoping he'll be okay. And I think at that age, I felt an extreme sense of having abandoned my dad, because I left home when I was 14, and he was left alone. And I think I carried a lot of guilt. So then acting those scenes out with the White Knight and Alice was, brought up a lot of that grief for me, I think. But no, we would have never really talked about it, I don't think.
That's a lot to frame as an adult, a lot to frame, much more to frame as a child, understanding all of that. You move on to talk about another really important moment in your life. And that was at the hands of an abuser, and quite a public story, a story that many of us all read about in the news, but was not attached to your name at the time. This, of course, is the story of Jian Ghomeshi and the abuse that he doled out to many, many women, including Sarah. And I'd love to talk about that a little bit. I wonder how you came to understand that that was a piece of your story that you were ready to share with the world.
Mm-hmm. I was never going to be ready. So that's like, I don't think I felt ready when I wrote it or when it came out, but it definitely felt deeply to me like at some point in my life, I was going to have to step forward and back up those women. And I had wished desperately that I could do that at the time. And I had a toddler and a newborn. I come from a family with a lot of lawyers in it who were able to outline to me exactly what the process would look like, about how the sort of gaps in my memory and the inconsistencies in my behavior, which turn out to be very, very normal behaviors post a trauma like this, of being friendly with him, even ingratiating, those things would not help me and lend any legitimacy to the stories of the women who came forward. So I had to make a really tough call that I didn't feel okay about, which was to not come forward to protect my mental health and my kids. But what I did know was that there was going to be a moment where I wasn't going to be able to live with that forever. And, as we saw more and more court cases and as the conversation progressed over the years, I realized what I could offer in the absence of having been able to come forward at the time was a really complete picture of what it looks like for a woman to decide to come forward or to not come forward. And I think there are many, many more women who don't come forward than do, but we don't hear from them and we don't hear what that thought process feels like. And so I thought, what if I cross-examine myself? What if I say everything? I say all the embarrassing parts. I say all the ways in which I was friendly with him. I went on his show. If I lay myself bare in terms of, and also the way I had remembered it and told the story over the years, if I lay myself bare and expose that, is that like a helpful tool when people are looking at women on the stand and wondering why there's inconsistencies and wondering why they wrote that letter afterwards and how that could possibly go together with someone who's claiming they had this traumatic experience? I just thought maybe that's a contribution I could make. So who knows, but that was the idea in finally doing it. But did I ever feel ready to tell the story? Not really.
No, that was a big, big step to take.
Yeah. Thank you.
One of the things you noted when talking about sexual abuse resonated, I think, with a lot of women. You talked about how it was a bit of a party story, or a party, not a party joke, a story you told at parties that was humorous and funny, and you were able to make light of this horrible incident that was awkward and icky. When you were going to write it, how did you manage to turn away from trying to do that?
Well, I think at that point, the story had become, was living in a more real place in me. I wasn't in a process of trying to normalize or brush off. I think by the time I sat down to write it, I'd done a lot of work thinking about it over the years and talking to people about it. So I wasn't in that state anymore, but I do think this is what a lot of people do with really difficult experiences, particularly women. I don't even know if it's fair to say that. Maybe anybody who's gone through a difficult experience. I remember sitting once with a group of actresses, and I had this idea for an anthology of short stories, of short films, where we would each direct the worst thing that had ever happened to us on a set, and it would be hilarious. And everyone told their most hilarious, awful story. And then at the end of it, we were like, I think everybody just told a story about assault. I bet nobody had named it that. Nobody had talked about it that way. Yeah. It had been carried as this hilarious, awful thing that happened. And I just think we do that a lot. And it makes sense to survive and to have to live with a story that's hard. We have lots of creative coping mechanisms, but the reframing is an interesting process.
You wrote that you observed close lawyer friends of yours mock the way that women spoke during the trial, and that they were furious that they were not perfect witnesses. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it just happened, right? We all just saw what happened with Amber Heard. Amber Heard was not a perfect witness. She was very far from a perfect witness. She's probably not somebody I'd like to go out for dinner with ever. But I don't think that means that she was lying about the most important things she was saying. I don't want to like make a statement about that, or but I do feel like unless we behave in all of the expected perfect ways after something terrible happens to us, which nobody ever does, it's really hard to be credible. And so, and the thing about the truth, the most interesting thing to me in that trial was when the defense said, you either believe all of it or you believe none of it. You know, she's either lying about everything or she's telling the truth about everything. Imagine if any of you were subjected to that in your life. Imagine that if there's anything you said that was a lie, we don't believe anything you say about the rest of your life. Like, it's an absurd way of viewing somebody, especially when they're claiming trauma has happened. But we definitely do it to women in sexual assault cases, and we do it consciously and subconsciously in a myriad of ways.
So you write the essay, you put it out into the world. I believe, did it go in the New York Times as well? It went widely before publication?
No, we kept it. We didn't want it like excerpted, so it came out just in the book.
But it came out at the same time, widely.
Yeah, it was written about.
Did you hear from any of the women who had come forward? Did you talk to?
Yeah, I did, and mostly I've talked to Lucy. I've had contact with another one, but mostly talked to Lucy and have received enormous support. And Lucy's a really exceptional person. I don't know many people like her, and she just has incredibly generous instincts. That's just how she's built and what she's worked at. And I guess I was amazed that I didn't get more anger, that I didn't come forward at the time. I think that's what I would have expected. And instead it was just like, such warmth and support.
Because it was such a human response, I think. The way you wrote about it, what you put out there, I feel like every woman anyway, can relate to. It was quite remarkable in that way. Thanks. So the stories that you have chosen to adapt for film speak to your interests, and I think also your life experiences. You very early on asked to adapt Margaret Atwood's. Remind me, which story?
Alias Grace.
It was Alias Grace. Yeah. Okay. How old were you?
I think I was 17.
17. Yeah. 17. Wanted to try to option it. Weren't successful at that time.
No, she did say no.
Okay.
She's not stupid.
But you managed to do it later wonderfully. You adapted Alice Munro's The Bear Goes Over the Mountain. You are currently, or have just finished, adapting Miriam Taves's book, Women Talking, which is coming out this fall, which is pretty darn exciting. I'm curious to know, what has led you, do you think, to these particular author's work? Why were you drawn to Alias Grace? What made you want to adapt Alice Munro's work, and so on?
I think that the reasons are probably these really subconscious things that I still don't have a handle on. Like my gut is that when a piece of art really connects with you, it's because there's something that the author themselves didn't completely understand, and it's connecting with something you don't totally understand about yourself, and it makes you just want to unpack it. So for me, I think those three things just raised so many questions for me about why I couldn't stop thinking about it, why I couldn't stop walking around inside the story. And it's such a privilege as a reader to get to live inside a book or a story that you love. Like if you imagine spending 2 or 3 years of your life inside your favorite novel. or inside your favorite story, and getting to talk to the author. I mean, I basically got to do your job, but like for years, which it was just an amazing experience to just have those conversations and ask everything I wanted to ask. And I do think that helped me reveal certain things that I had been living with that I didn't have words for, but it took a long time to get there. I think with Alias Grace, it was about the idea of multiple truths and about who's telling the truth, and if people are telling the truth about who they are, and who to believe, and the idea of like all of these narratives that contradict each other, and there being pieces of truth in all of them. That became a fixation for me.
And that fits so beautifully into other work you've done, including this book here, looking at what multiple truths are, back to how memory plays against itself. Yeah. And of course, your own documentary that you so beautifully wrote and directed, including your family, looking at how memory shifts and changes and who do you believe. Are you aware that this is a continual theme for you?
Yeah.
The way that memory works.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, it was a blessing and a curse, but I come from a family that questions every story, right? So that can take the form of wanting to find creative versions of something. It can take the form of minimizing. It can take the form of, why do we remember these things differently? Let's examine that. Like, I think that's a natural language for me. I think my dad did a lot of that. I think all of my family, and I think that's healthy. I think it's healthy to have a skepticism about our narratives. It can go down a rabbit hole of, not believing things it's important to be able to believe. But I think it's like an interesting place to begin a conversation about the past. So I'm just kind of curious, again, sort of the opposite of you believe all of it or you believe nothing. It's like finding where the truthful threads are and commonalities in many different versions of the same story that seem to contradict each other is very interesting to me.
And how does that play out within your relationships with your family, and asking them to participate in the filming of this documentary that is so personal to all of you? Would you like to come up and answer that question?
The person who least wants to talk about it.
Yeah. How, and the writing of this book as well, because you touch on some really important pieces here. You talk about, in your essay about your concussion, you talk about how some members of your family didn't believe you, that you were suffering the way you were, and how that felt to you. How does that work with your family when you pull them into these stories that you are telling?
Yeah, with the film, everyone was incredible, participated, even though I think it was deeply uncomfortable and difficult for some people. Everyone participated, was fully supportive. And I kind of still can't believe that support and that participation, because they were ultimately allowing me control of telling a narrative that was very important to all of us. So there was a lot of generosity in that film. I think, I was very conscious of not telling my own version of that story. Basically, everyone's version is in there except mine. There's no voiceover. I don't get interviewed. And I made a very conscious decision that because I was going to be able to be editing and controlling and shaping everybody else's version, to give myself some kind of voice of God and tell my version felt really inappropriate and also weirdly unethical on some level. But what it meant was I never told my version of that story, which is actually very different than any of the versions that are in the film.
That's fascinating.
And maybe one day I'll tell it, although it doesn't feel particularly important to me too. I'm more curious about other people's. But this book is just my version. And that's complicated. It's complicated for me because I'm kind of putting out and making myself vulnerable in a way I didn't in that film. And it's complicated for other people because it's not necessarily lining up exactly with their version. So I would say for the most part, again, incredibly generous support where I wouldn't have expected it, but obviously some complications too.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's something that memoirists struggle with. It's something I think all writers struggle with. How much truth can you tell without hurting or offending somebody that you dearly love? How much of their story are you allowed to tell within your own? It's a really interesting balance here. moving on to another essay, which again, I think is one, and correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe you did write about for a paper when we talk about Terry Gilliam. Mm-hmm. You starred in
The Adventures of
Baron Munchausen when you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And at the time, to your parents, and especially your dad, my understanding is this was a huge coup. This was the pinnacle of success for you to be handpicked by Terry Gilliam himself and to star in a film that had people like Eric Idle in it and Robin Williams and Uma Thurman, I think was, you said as well. This did not go well. But you were not really aware of how unwell it went until you grew into adulthood. Is that fair to say?
I think with that experience, I knew it was really bad. It was like one of the few things that didn't take a long time to unpack. Like it was bad. Okay. And I was like really, and it was sort of famously bad. I mean, like it was written about, there was a book written about the disaster of that movie. So it was like, that wasn't as hard for people to minimize.
Yeah.
It was documented.
But you did not receive that feedback or that backing from the people in power saying, it was really that bad. We're really sorry. You sought to try to remedy that as an adult. Mm-hmm. Can you tell the audience a bit about that?
Sure. So it was a really unsafe set. There were explosives going off all the time. There were a lot of accidents. People went to the hospital a lot. It was just out of control. So I found out that Terry Gilliam was going to cast another 9-year-old girl in a film when I was in my 20s. And I realized that I had been telling these stories for years, but I'd never actually reached out to him. And so when I found out he was going to cast another Canadian 9-year-old girl in a thing, I was like, you know what, I want to reach out to you because I've never actually told you how the impact of this on me and what I remember. And to his credit, he responded right away. Some of his email back is, minimizing and maybe even potentially a tiny bit gaslighty, but he did respond. And that is one of the things that I really admire about him is he will respond. He will expose himself to criticism. He doesn't hide. He doesn't pretend he thinks and feels things he doesn't. And I do admire that about him. But so I had sort of a back and forth with him that I was pleased he responded right away. Of course, it was somewhat unsatisfying. Then, as an adult sort of looking back even at that kind of exchange I was having, in the email exchange, I do a lot of laying the blame at my parents' feet. And I do a lot of making sure he doesn't feel attacked, and a lot of taking care of him in the email exchange. And it's just interesting then looking back at what I did when I was, 24, 25, around 40, you do kind of look at your own machinations differently in terms of how you're still trying to make sure that person doesn't have their ego bruised.
Right. Similar to what happened with Gameshi when you met with him in the radio studio again, trying to ease the bad feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we do a lot of that. I mean, especially if someone's caused fear in us.
Yeah.
I think the idea of a confrontation is not many of us have been trained that way in this world, to provoke a confrontation with someone who feels like a threat.
Quite right.
Hence the imperfect witness, circuitous behavior that seems so inconsistent with what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. In 2015, you were minding your own business when a fire extinguisher fell on your head, resulting in years of severe disability and frustration. Tell us just a little bit about that first part of your story when you weren't sure whether you'd get better.
Yeah, the really severe part where I really wasn't able to do anything but lie in a dark room, or at least I thought I couldn't, was, probably half a year. And then I would have periods of time where I was more functional than others and was able to do a pretty good job for limited periods of time in very controlled environments of seeming normal. But had extreme sensitivity to noise, light, pounding headaches, extreme fatigue. And that lasted on and off for about 3.5 years. And I was basically told I would never be able to make a film again or, do much. And even just managing home life of getting kids to school and being around my kids was constant work, and hurt a lot. And so I was sort of told, I had varying medical advice. There were some doctors who I saw who were caught in a very old mode of like lie in a dark room and don't do anything. I got some more current advice, which was, go outside, try to go for a walk. When you feel sick, go home. And I went to, nothing was working. I bought every kind of snake oil for sale that there was.
Everybody claiming they were Sidney Crosby's doctor.
Everyone's Sidney Crosby's doctor.
Yeah.
There's like 800 Sidney Crosby's doctors out there, and they're all super proud of themselves. So I went to a lot of Sidney Crosby's doctors, including like some guy in like Oakville in like a strip mall. He also cured Sidney Crosby. But like, every kind of like neuro whatever, watching like bouncing balls go across a computer screen, or chiropractors, like neurobiofeedback. I did everything. And some things worked a little bit maybe, but anytime I was overstimulated or overstressed or had lots of things going on or multitasking, I was right back where I started. And then I eventually got convinced by a friend who got a lot better to go to this clinic in Pittsburgh. And the advice I'd been given, go up to your threshold and then come back down and just listen to your body, come back down. This guy was like, stop tracking your symptoms, start paying attention to your recovery times. Like, you need to exercise every day. You need to be going into the environments that bother you. And your brain is becoming weaker at the things it's been avoiding. So this was scaffolded. Like, I want to be clear, I'm not a doctor. And if you have a concussion, you should be seeking medical advice, not mine. So now I can blather on. But basically, it was scaffolded with a lot of like vestibular exercises and very specific physical exercises. But a lot of it was exposure therapy. So, screens bothered me and being in front of a computer, I had to do more of it. If going to a party bothered me, 2 a week. If grocery stores drove me crazy, I was the only grocery shopper in the family. It was a nightmare. Mm-hmm. And the other advice was, instead of like, when you feel bad, go lie down, it was just change your activity. Mm-hmm. Don't go to zero. If it's driving you crazy to be in front of a screen, go for a walk around the block. So this whole idea was, which is the title of the book, run towards the danger, run towards the things that are bothering you. And I had been very steeped in this culture of listen to your body, listen to your body. And I think that can be really useful if you're someone whose coping mechanism is to fill your life with activity and keep going and be over caffeinated and just like, that's the way you live. I think listening to your body is probably a great skill to develop. For me, like listening to my body is like, let's lie in bed and doom scroll. Like, that's what my body says, like really loudly all the time. So listening to my body is like, my body's not going to help me.
I have to say that the dearest part of that essay was when you described your daughter, and I'm forgetting what her name was, but she said to you, Mommy, I just love sick you because you lie on the floor and play with me and you're there all the time. Yeah. So
yeah, and so there was, there is useful stuff about slowing down and listening to your body. It's just, it can't be all of it. And I think that it's really possible, especially when you have a chronic condition like that, to just feel, to stop feeling resilient in any way, to stop feeling vital. Mm-hmm. And I think that feeling of like, doing that thing that's a bit uncomfortable and finding out you could survive it was something that had gotten lost for me.
It's quite a wonderful metaphor for life as well. He cured you, this doctor, who, by the way, had a photo of Sidney Crosby on his wall.
With him.
With him.
Had the photo.
That was Sidney Crosby's doctor.
It may have been photoshopped. I don't know. I mean, yeah, he cured me. I'm pretty evangelical about this and not to be trusted. Like, my sister's a family doctor, so I'm giving so many caveats to this. Like, this is a doctor looked at me and was like, I promise you're going to get 100% better in 6 weeks. At which point, like, I have enough doctors in my family where I was like, you're a charlatan. That's not something you can say. in my case, it worked. And it wasn't just like a cure of a concussion. It was a complete lifestyle change, a complete paradigm shift in my life, which led me to be able to, make this film this year. It led me to writing this book. Like, it was this idea of running towards the danger and of allowing yourself to go to places of discomfort with some confidence in yourself that you could survive it instead of perpetually avoiding discomfort was huge game changer and so liberating.
Amazing. One thing that I noted throughout this entire book is that you meticulously name the healthcare providers who brought you comfort and relief. You name the physiotherapist, you name the osteosurgeon, the nurses, the OBGYN, and this doctor too. Why was that so important to you to have those full names in there?
I think it's amazing when a medical professional can see the whole patient and not just the condition they're treating. In the case of all of those people I've named, they looked at the whole picture and they took the time to find out what the whole picture was and treated the things that weren't obvious that were underlying the other things. I think they're all people who were passionate about their work and loved caring for people and loved seeing people get better. And I would be a completely different person if I hadn't had the luck of having those specific doctors and nurses.
In the essay, Run Toward the Danger, you were also very careful to note your appreciation of the Canadian system, even though your ultimate relief came from a doctor in the U.S. Was that an important point for you to make?
Yeah. I mean, the idea that I went to the States and got private healthcare, it was very difficult for me. Like, it went against every fiber of my being and makes me want to vomit when I think about it. I don't think it's an indictment of the Canadian healthcare system. I think, talking to doctors down there are many fields in which we're way ahead here. And yet people will go and pay for the same surgery in the States because they assume it's better care because they have to pay for it. Like surgeries that were invented here, people will go and fly to get a pay for them in the States. So I don't think it's an indictment of where we're at. There's always improvements to be made in a healthcare system. We could certainly use a substantial reinvestment of resources into our system now. But I think this is just a very specific thing that, the NFL players, the NHL players, the Formula One racers, this is the guy they go to. And he really worked for me. I don't think there's like a lot of studies to back this up. So I also want to be clear about that. But
it worked for you.
It worked for me.
And we're all grateful for that.
Anecdotally, it's anecdotal. Consult your doctor.
The bio that we work off of includes political activist in it. What does that mean to you, being a political activist?
I don't know. What it doesn't mean to me is like being on Twitter all day, retweeting stuff, which is all I do right now. But I think, at various points in my life, I've been more politically active. I originally mostly around homelessness and poverty. That was a lot of my teens were dedicated to the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty and activism when Mike Harris was premier. So that was like my early activism. My 20s, I was really active in terms of healthcare with the Ontario Health Coalition. And so at various points, I've been sort of, active, and then I come out of it and then I go back into it. But it's always, I think, a part of my life, I think, to want to be engaged and want to be part of a larger conversation, or at least, I would say not even be part of a conversation, but wanting to try to push voices out that should be heard and to do what I can to facilitate that.
Are you going to be marching with some of us in the streets coming soon?
I'm sure I will. I'm sure this group, we could just like have a spontaneous protest. It's like mostly women.
Yeah.
It's convenient. Yeah.
We're going to turn it over to you in just a moment, but I did want to find out from you about your upcoming projects. We touched upon Women Talking. I guess I'd love to know what that experience was like working with Miriam. Yeah. I understand Brad Pitt was a producer. What was that all like?
That was an amazing experience. It was my first film that I directed since I had kids. Like, I was mostly home and writing for the last 10 and a half, 11 years. So to be back on a set, and also it was a studio film. So we had kind of the resources we needed to make it as epic as I felt it should be, which might be mysterious if you've read the book, because it's a bunch of women sitting around talking in a hayloft, but I managed to spend a lot of studio money on it, which I'm super proud of. It was an incredible group of actors. It was a really collective, very collaborative experience. I'd had 3 kids home in a pandemic, so it didn't feel hard, like, at all. Like, I wasn't stressed at all. It was the best training for being a filmmaker ever. Okay. It's done. We just finished it, and it's out in the fall. Like, I think it's probably doing festivals in the fall, and then in December release.
That's very, very exciting. Looking forward to that. So we're going to turn it over to you, and Vancouver Writers Fest folks will be in the aisles here with cordless mics to pass to you. If you can please put your question in the form of a question, that would be really excellent. We would all really appreciate that. And I will do my best to repeat back the question so that everyone has heard it nice and clearly. I see somebody back here.
Thank you very much for coming tonight to speak about your book. I think it was a fabulous book. One of the themes in your book is that the experiences we have actually change our memories of the past. And for you, you've now had the process of writing the book, publishing it, and then starting to get feedback from other people. How has that changed your perception of the memories of the past, the actual process of writing and getting the feedback? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I wanted to explore in this book is the fact that, our narratives about our lives aren't static things, and they can move and change. And I think there's an initial process that's really important of discovering what your stories are, what your narrative is in your own voice, especially if you've had other narratives from other people about who you are in your life. And then I think there's another process that I'm equally interested in, which is when we start to let go of our tight grip on what those narratives are and notice how kind of flexible they are in terms of what they mean to us and the place they hold in our lives and how much they're either haunting us or moving us forward. And I think having experiences in present life that echo old traumatic experiences and having them go a different, better way can kind of change and shift the relationship to the past. And I'm really curious about that. And in terms of releasing the book, it's been really unexpected. Like, it's not at all what I expected it to be. Instead of this feeling of being kind of like, it really is running towards the danger to expose yourself this much. And I couldn't quite figure out why I was doing it. And then I just did it. And what's interesting is, I really wish everyone could have this experience of having someone read your whole story. And I almost feel like I wish, especially in families or in friendships where there's misunderstandings, if people could just write out the whole story from beginning to end and give it to each other, because things have been so interesting. Like, someone I lived next to for 15 years read my book and I saw them the other day, and she came out crying and hugged me and was like, "Oh my God, Sarah, I can't believe all this happened to you." And I was like, okay, I lived next door to you while it was happening. We talked about all this. I was like, I know, but the concussion, I was like, I know, but I saw you every day. And you just realize no one actually knows what's going on. It doesn't matter if people are living with you. They don't actually know what's going on with you. And so there's been this acknowledgement from people in my life of things that have happened that I just assumed they knew, and they didn't have a frame for it or context. And it's made me kind of shocked by the number of misunderstandings we all have with the people closest to us, and how they, if someone could read your whole story, they might relate to you differently, and the ways in which we're confused by people's lack of empathy is actually just a lack of data sometimes. So I don't know, I just had a friend of mine said it would be great to have this as a project in seniors' homes and stuff, is just to have a place for people to put their whole stories online, just to have them read, because it's been just a very incredibly healing process. It's sort of a gross way of phrasing it. I don't love that way of phrasing it, but it has been. It's been amazing.
Thank you for that question. Yes, right here.
Thank you. So, Sarah, I actually listened to your book on Audible, and I would highly recommend that for anybody here because, as you can tell, she's an amazing speaker. So to hear her voice read her book is really cool.
Thank you.
Anyway, I was really struck by a quote in the book that says, "So much of coming to terms with hard things from the past seems to be about believing our own accounts, having our memories confirmed by those who were there, and honored by those who weren't. Why is it so hard for us to believe our own stories?" And I really felt like that was in the essay about Baron von Munchausen. But I really felt like it could have been dropped into any of the stories in this book. And I just wondered, for you, when was the point where you felt like you could believe your own stories? Can you? Do you feel like you can?
It's an ongoing process. No, the answer is no. I think I actually had a moment in book signing recently where somebody came up and told me a very similar experience they had had to me in a very similar situation. And my first thought, this is after years of therapy and writing this and having the book edited, putting it out to the world, doing interviews, my first thought was, oh, maybe I didn't make that up. It's completely insane. It's just, it's like every story in that book for me still is a process of, can I believe myself? And I have one friend who read the book and said, I don't think this is as common an experience as you think, to not believe your own stories. People believe their own stories. And I went, really? And then I looked at her and I went, oh, right, you didn't have any trauma when you were young. You actually believe yourself. That's amazing. But I do think it is common for people who've gone through things, especially early in life, that have been traumatic. There's the minimizing, there's the coping you do, there's the minimizing other people do, there's the reframing other people do to protect themselves and their relationship with you. It's a mess trying to pull apart the threads, which is why I think that part of the process of telling ourselves our own stories in our own words is important. And I think I've known that for a long time and done psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, but I think the new realization for me is many stories can coexist and some of them seem to contradict each other, and that's important too. I think my dad, in my film is a hero, and he is a hero in that story. He had a heroic side in terms of his generosity in a very difficult situation of finding out I wasn't his biological daughter. He was generous and worried about other people and interested and curious. And he, I also was neglected as a kid and, kind of let down. And those stories are both true. Yeah. I think that's really hard at the beginning when we're coming to terms with anger and difficult feelings about our past. I think it's necessary to go through the kind of anger around that stuff. But I also think both can be true, about all of us, probably.
It's where empathy comes from. It's how you create empathy, being able to see both sides of that. Yeah, amazing. Thank you for that. Over here, yes. Yeah.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for being here and for your book. Also a trauma survivor, so really spoke to me and really appreciated reading it. I'm what's the word I'm looking for? Attempting to be a screenwriter. I've been doing it for over 10 years, but actively pursuing it and getting feedback and stuff now and feeling strong enough to do so. And I find through your book, but also through your films that you've written and directed, you're very good with the imagery and having the imagery suit the tonality and what you're trying to convey in the story without having to use too much dialogue. And there's a particular story where I have a situation where it is basically almost one person kind of speaking to themselves in the room, but I can't just write it as that because that would be really boring. So I was wondering if you had any advice on how to learn more about writing about imagery and tonality in a scene rather than just about the exact wording you're needing to get the story across. Thank you.
For me, I think I've become a more visual filmmaker, but it was hard work for me. It's not my natural instinct. It's not what I'm naturally talented at. It was a lot of working at it. But I would say that the main thing for me that's helpful in terms of the visual aspect of film is music. So that for me was key in terms any image I've ever had for a film that feels pivotal or important has come from listening to music and finding what I think the music is for the film. What you find for the music for the film in the screenwriting stage is never what it is or should be later, but what it feels like now. And I think kind of letting that guide you. For me, that works. I don't know if it'll work for you. But. And also just watching like a million movies that you love silently, like just turn off the sound. Really helps.
Good advice. We have time for just a couple more, and I see you there in the middle in the white t-shirt.
Hi there. My question is, do you think that the reason that women aren't believed about like domestic violence or is because people do tend to see someone as either good or bad? So they're saying, oh, I saw this guy and he was always so good to me. But they don't realize that people, just like your dad, can have both sides. They can be an abuser, but they can also be loving. So I just wondered what you thought about that.
I think we have a hard time with complexity generally in people. Like we just can't accept that people are many things, and people get cast in our own lives as heroes and villains. And I don't know if I have the answer to that. That would be something I'd be confident in giving. But I do think for me, like that's my instinct when you ask the question is just, and I also think like we're sort of trained from an early age to sort of like make things look okay and seem okay. And like that there wouldn't be a space for us to talk about what's wrong without seeming whiny or not being able to handle things. And but my main instinct is just, it's amazing to me that people won't accept complexity. And I've been in this situation with close friends where someone has seemed like a great guy for 20 years. And then you find out actually they weren't such a great guy and been just staggered by it. And what I hope the progress is that next time I'm less surprised, this is something we should believe right away. This is something we should be open to accepting right away, that we got it wrong or that person had that side and another side. So.
All right, one last question, and I see someone right there in the middle.
So I just want to apologize in advance because I haven't read the book yet. This is just a general thing about your career that I'm interested in. I wanted to ask about No Such Thing, the Hal Hartley film you were in. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe that was your first collaboration with Julie Christie.
Yes.
Perfect. Excellent. That's going to make the rest of this question much easier. Christie has a very limited amount of screen time in that movie, and I was wondering if you felt like a creative kinship with her, even in the limited time she had on set, and if meeting her gave you a sort of creative in adapting The Bear Came Over the Mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a film I really like that not many people have seen. A weird plug for a movie I did when I was 21. Somehow I'm doing that. She had a small part in that, and we spent a lot of time talking. There were a lot of scenes in a car, and so I ended up being in this car with her in Iceland for really long periods of time. And she was a really pivotal person in my life. Like she introduced me to meditation and Buddhism and all kinds of things that became a big part of my life. And then I read this short story by Alice Munro, The Bear Came Over the Mountain, that Away From Her is based on, in the New Yorker, I think on the plane on my way home from Iceland. And I remember I just saw Julie's face the whole time I read that story. And I think that if I hadn't known Julie, I wouldn't have read that story and wanted to make it into a film, but I saw her in that role.
Great question and a lovely way to round off our conversation here tonight. Sarah Polley, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
You have been listening to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. To hear more events like this one and view our upcoming events, visit our website at writersfest.bc.ca.